In late March 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final, dangerous phase. The German front was collapsing, but not fast enough for Dwight D. Eisenhower. Every hour mattered. Every bridge, every road, every hesitation could cost thousands of lives. That's when George S. Patton did something no one else even considered possible. Patton wasn't supposed to move yet. According to Allied plans, his Third Army was meant to pause, refuel, reorganize, and wait for clearance. Intelligence warned that German units, though retreating, were still capable of brutal counterattacks. The maps said slow down. Patton looked at the same maps and saw something else, an opening. Instead of waiting, Patton issued quiet orders late at night. No speeches, no dramatic announcements, just movement. Columns of tanks rolled forward. Trucks packed with infantry drove without headlights. Engineers worked on the move. Supply officers were told one thing only: keep them moving, whatever it takes. Within hours, Patton's army began a relentless push, day and night, across shattered roads, through villages that barely knew the war had passed them. Drivers slept at the wheel in shifts. Mechanics repaired vehicles while engines were still warm. If a bridge was down, engineers built one. If fuel ran low, Patton rerouted supplies from units miles behind the front. No pauses, no excuses. Meanwhile, Allied headquarters believed Patton was still consolidating his position. Eisenhower reviewed the situation reports the next morning expecting routine updates. Instead, a young staff officer hesitated, then pointed to the map. Patton's spearhead wasn't where it was supposed to be. It was 200 miles ahead. At first, Eisenhower assumed it was a mistake, a misplaced marker, a reporting error. He asked for confirmation, then confirmation again. The silence in the room stretched. Finally, someone said it quietly. "Sir, Patton is already there." Eisenhower leaned forward, staring at the map. He knew exactly what that meant. If Patton was right, if the German defenses were truly broken, this move could end entire battles before they began. But if Patton was wrong, an entire army was exposed deep in enemy territory. Eisenhower exhaled slowly, half stunned, half impressed. "Good God," he said, almost to himself. "He's already there." And the most dangerous part of Patton's gamble hadn't even begun yet. When Patton's forward units finally slowed, it wasn't because they were ordered to stop. It was because they had reached something the Germans believed was still days away from Allied hands. Road signs told the story first. Villages that German officers assumed were safely behind the lines were already quiet. Too quiet. White sheets hung from windows. Local civilians stood frozen as American tanks rolled past, disbelief written on their faces. Patton's lead elements had not smashed through resistance. They had slipped past it. German defenses, stretched thin and constantly repositioning, had prepared for a cautious advance. What they faced instead was speed so extreme it broke their command structure. Phone lines went unanswered. Orders arrived hours too late. Units meant to block crossings were still loading trucks when U.S. armor appeared on the horizon. One German officer later admitted, "We were fighting ghosts. By the time we reacted, they were already behind us." Patton moved like a blade. If resistance appeared, he didn't stop the army, he cut around it. Infantry pinned down enemy pockets while tanks surged forward. Engineers followed so closely that bridges were repaired almost immediately after being damaged. Supply convoys rerouted themselves in real time, chasing Patton's spearheads instead of waiting for formal instructions. At Allied headquarters, the mood shifted from shock to fear. Patton was now operating far ahead of neighboring armies. His flanks were thin. His supply lines were stretched. If the Germans managed a coordinated counterattack, the Third Army could be isolated deep inside hostile territory. Eisenhower was warned repeatedly. He's outrunning everyone. He's exposed. This could end badly. Eisenhower listened. He understood the risk better than anyone, but there was another reality on the map. Every mile Patton advanced collapsed German morale. Entire units surrendered without firing. Commanders abandoned positions simply because they no longer knew who was in control. Speed had become a weapon. Patton sensed it too. He pushed harder. Drivers were told to keep engines running. If a vehicle broke down, crews fixed it on the roadside or abandoned it and climbed onto the next truck. Sleep came in minutes, not hours. Maps were updated while vehicles were moving. Patton sent a short message back to headquarters. Enemy resistance is disorganized. Momentum must not be lost. It wasn't arrogance. It was instinct. And then, late that night, German High Command finally understood the scale of the disaster. Patton wasn't advancing toward them. He was already inside their decision loop, moving faster than orders could be written. The question was no longer whether Patton had gone too far. It was whether anyone, friend or enemy, could catch up to him. German commanders didn't realize the truth all at once. At first, reports sounded impossible. Units claimed American armor had appeared behind prepared defensive lines. Roadblocks were bypassed. Checkpoints reported enemy vehicles coming from the wrong direction. Maps were checked and rechecked. Nothing made sense. Some commanders assumed panic. Others assumed exaggeration. Then, the phone lines went silent. Entire German formations discovered they were no longer guarding the front. They were standing inside a pocket that hadn't officially been declared yet. American columns weren't attacking head-on. They were flowing around resistance, cutting roads, seizing crossroads, and vanishing again. A German staff officer later wrote, "We prepared to fight forward. Instead, the enemy was already in our rear." Patton's doctrine was simple. Never stop for what you can leave behind. If a town resisted, infantry fixed it in place. Tanks went around. If a bridge was defended, engineers searched for another crossing upstream or downstream, sometimes within minutes. The goal wasn't territory. It was dislocation. German orders became meaningless the moment they were written. By the time a command arrived, Patton's units were already beyond it. Retreat routes vanished. Supply dumps were captured intact. Columns attempting to reposition ran straight into American roadblocks that hadn't existed an hour earlier. Some German commanders made a cold calculation. Fighting meant destruction. Withdrawal meant survival. Entire units pulled back without firing, abandoning heavy equipment just to escape encirclement. White flags appeared not after battle, but before it. At Allied headquarters, the map told an extraordinary story. Patton's advance wasn't a line, it was a fan, spreading faster than planners believed possible. Eisenhower studied it in silence. He saw the danger, but he also saw opportunity. German resistance wasn't just weakening, it was unraveling. Patton sent another brief update. Enemy cohesion collapsing. Pressure maintained. No drama, no flourish, just momentum. And ahead of Patton's spearheads lay the final prize. River crossings the Germans believed were still secure. They had no idea how close the Americans already were. By the time German commanders understood what Patton was aiming for, it was already too late. The rivers ahead, natural barriers meant to slow any advance, were supposed to buy time. Explosives had been prepared. Demolition teams were assigned. Orders were clear: destroy the crossings the moment Americans approached. But Patton didn't approach the way they expected. His spearheads arrived hours earlier, moving so fast that some German units guarding the bridges hadn't even received the destruction orders yet. In other places, commanders hesitated, waiting for confirmation that never came. Radios crackled with half messages. Couriers were still on the road. And then, American tanks appeared at the riverbanks. Engineers rushed forward under covering fire that barely existed. Infantry fanned out, securing both sides before resistance could form. In several locations, German guards surrendered in disbelief, staring at bridges they had been certain would be blown long before this moment. Patton didn't slow down to celebrate. The instant a crossing was secured, traffic poured over it. Tanks first, then trucks, then artillery. Within minutes, what should have been a major obstacle became a highway into Germany's collapsing rear. At Allied headquarters, the reports sounded unreal. bridges intact, crossings secured, enemy response minimal. Eisenhower stared at the updates, understanding the full weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just speed anymore, it was strategic shock. The Germans had lost their final chance to stabilize the front. Patton sent one final, characteristically short message: "Crossing secured. Advance continues." No speeches, no claims of glory, just motion. From that moment on, the German High Command knew the truth. The war was no longer slipping away. It was gone. Their lines weren't bent or broken. They had been bypassed by time itself. When historians later tried to explain what had happened, they struggled to find the right word. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was velocity. By the time German High Command attempted to reorganize, Patton's columns were already beyond their reach. Headquarters relocated, then relocated again, only to discover American units had already cut the next road. Orders were issued, rewritten, then abandoned. The front no longer existed. What Patton proved in those hours was something commanders had theorized but never seen at this scale. Speed could collapse an army without destroying it first. German units weren't defeated in set-piece fights. They were rendered irrelevant, isolated, outpaced, and psychologically overwhelmed. Some surrendered without ever seeing the enemy. Others simply went home. At Allied headquarters, the risk everyone feared never came. There was no massive counterattack, no encirclement of the Third Army. German command cohesion was gone. Fuel was gone. Time was gone. Eisenhower later reflected on that moment, the instant he realized Patton was already far ahead of the plan. It wasn't just surprise, it was understanding. War had changed in front of his eyes. Patton never gave a victory speech about the march. He didn't frame it as genius. When asked how it was possible, he gave a simple answer: "I didn't stop." That was the lesson. Not firepower, not numbers, not even bravery. Momentum. And once momentum passed a certain point, the war didn't end with a final blow. It ended because one side could no longer keep up.